In January of 1997, in an old logging forest at the far northern edge of Arlow Province, a 15-year-old girl named Mira Halden vanished mysteriously while walking home from a youth center. No one was arrested. No official search was conducted. Only snow and absolute silence. For more than 2 decades, Mira's case was all but forgotten, with no clues, no hope, until a day this winter. A hiker reported a strange object protruding from the snow, a human hand. Around the wrist, a hand-woven bracelet made of coarse thread, disturbingly familiar. That tiny piece of evidence reopened Mira's case and brought with it a string of other forgotten disappearances. Girls who went missing around Darrow Creek. Where did they go? Who was the man the villagers only dared whisper about as Bergen? And why had no one ever spoken his name aloud? Snow fell for 3 consecutive days, covering Darrow Creek in an eerie stillness, as if the entire town was being buried in memory. Tall black pines stood rigid along the edge of town, their branches heavy with fresh snow. Everything was muted beneath the ash-gray sky. Rooftops, cars, old roads, and history. Sergeant Isla Varnen of the Arlow Provincial Police shut off her engine at the start of a trail marked Route 42 East Logging Path. The old wooden sign was nearly obscured in the dense mist. The radio still crackled with weather warnings. Black ice forming on secondary roads continued heavy snowfall, caution advised. Isla tightened her scarf and stepped out of the car. The compact snow under her boots cracked sharply like a warning. The wind sliced against her skin and the sun did not rise so much as cast a dim streak of light behind thick clouds. The informant was a thin old man in a worn wool coat, shoulders damp from the moisture. He hovered near the trailhead, visibly uneasy. "You're the one who called?" Isla asked. He nodded, eyes red, breath curling in the cold air. "I didn't know what to do. I didn't dare touch it." "What did you see?" He pointed behind him to where a small slope led into a ravine. "Just past that fallen tree looked like a hand. At first I thought it was a branch, but then I saw skin." Isla asked nothing further. 15 years in the field had taught her that in places like this, the dead were never left to rest. She followed the old man through a narrow forest path. Snow came up to her knees, the ice brittle and cracked, no animal tracks, no wind, only silence. They stopped at the edge of the ravine, a deep slope blanketed in white. "There," the old man said, "just past that fallen tree." Isla stepped forward. She saw it immediately, a human hand, protruding from the snow, tilted at an angle, fingers curled, fingernails gray. Snow clung to the skin like chalk. The wrist was embedded in frozen earth. The old blood blackened, had bled into the snow. She crouched down, a small hand, female, likely teenage. Around the wrist, a bracelet of red, white, and yellow thread, woven in a traditional northern pattern, a sky braid bracelet. Isla's heart pounded. "Dear God," the old man breathed behind her. "Is it recent?" he asked. She didn't answer. Pressed the radio button. "Base, this is Unit 6, requesting forensic team to Route 42. Human remains found, suspected homicide. I repeat, suspected homicide." "Copy Unit 6. Flight conditions not viable. Forensics en route by vehicle from Reynard City, ETA 3 hours. Isla looked back at the hand. The surrounding pine forest whispered faintly, though there was no wind. "I'll hold the scene," she said. She marked the area with crime tape and activated the portable heater. The hiker spoke. "You think this is one of the old cases?" Isla stared at the bracelet. "Mira Halden," she whispered. "Went missing summer of '97, 15 years old, on her way home from the community center, never made it." The hiker looked up. 28 years ago. "I know. Was that Related to your sister? Isla's jaw clenched. Nina disappeared 3 months after Mira, same route, same hour of the night. The man said nothing more. They stood there, in the white silence, beside a small hand, the first clue after nearly 3 decades of silence. The storage room of the Darrow Creek Town Police Station sat in the basement, a damp, seldom visited place. Isla Varnen sat at an old wooden desk, before her an aged case file with the name Mira Halden, handwritten on the yellowed plastic cover. The contents were shockingly thin, just 5 pages. The case had once been labeled Suspected Runaway. No interviews were conducted after the first 2 weeks. The search team operated for only 7 days. There was no mention of suspicious behavior, trafficking, or any possible connection to the disappearance of Nina, Isla's sister. Isla gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles pale. She still remembered what former Sheriff Harlan Reese, who led the investigation back then, had once told her. "Don't go connecting ghosts, Isla. There are no ghosts." But now, Isla knew something had been hidden. A chain of disappearances, silent and deliberate. 3 hours later, the forensics team arrived. She joined them as they returned to the scene. The ravine near Route 42 was now cordoned off. Snow carefully scraped away layer by layer, every tool used with precision. Isla stood in silence, her gaze fixed on the now frozen bracelet. She held 2 names in her hands, Mira Halden and Nina Varnen, but that was only the beginning. That afternoon, Isla decided to head into the forest alone, taking the opposite direction of the usual patrol routes, toward what had once been the Red Hollow logging camp, a site abandoned since the early 2000s. Thick snow blanketed the path, the tall pines rising like columns of a forest cathedral, a silence so dense it pressed against the lungs. After about 20 minutes of walking, a clearing emerged. Before her stood the remains of Red Hollow, 3 rotting wooden cabins, a storage shed, and a collapsed fence surrounding a frozen dirt yard. Isla moved in cautiously. The first building had a caved-in roof. She continued to the second and stopped. The floor had rotted. Beneath it, a dark space about 1.5 meters deep. She turned on her flashlight and stepped down. In that cramped space, her beam swept across what had once been sleeping quarters. 3 old, moldy mattresses still intact, a few blankets, a tin bowl, and a rusted spoon. In the corner, another bracelet lay among broken wooden slats. On the wooden wall, carved by knife, Mira, Nina, Lena Castro. Isla read each name slowly. There were more. Some were just initials, others scrawled like a child's handwriting. Why had no one ever mentioned this place? Then a raspy voice spoke behind her. "This used to be where they kept the kids." Isla turned around. An old woman with silver hair wrapped in a thick wool coat stood at the doorway, her eyes squinting in the light. "What's your name?" Isla asked. "Olga Wren, but I think Mira used to call me Auntie. I was the last one to see her alive." Isla stepped closer. "The bracelet. Who made it?" "Mira," she replied, "but she never finished Nina's. Said she wanted to make it beautiful. Then she vanished." Isla picked up the bracelet, her hand trembling slightly. "And the other names?" The old woman nodded slowly. "I remember everyone, the ones everyone else forgot, but the forest didn't. Listen closely, Sergeant. If you listen long enough, the forest will tell you where the bones are." Isla said nothing. In the dim light, the woven thread bracelet glowed clearly, as a reminder and a beginning. That night, Isla returned home carrying the bracelet and a copied file of Mira Halden's case. She stopped in front of the old Halden family house, where Olga had lived for over 30 years. Beneath the snow-covered porch, the light inside glowed faintly like a memory. "I brought this," Isla said when Olga opened the door. The old woman said nothing, only silently accepted the file and bracelet. Sitting down on her old rocking chair, she began to flip through the pages. Old images resurfaced. Mira, 15 years old, eyes dark as if holding a question never answered. Notes from a patrol officer named Frank Dietz. No sign of foul play, teenager had a history of running away, case closed after 10 days, but inside the folder's cover was a small notebook, written by Mira herself. The handwriting was that of a teenager, hurried, fragmented, full of coded thoughts. Disjointed sentences, details caught between fear and truth. The man with the belt doesn't like it when we talk. Lena said he keeps photos. White truck, no license plate. They call him Bergen. He's the worst. Isla paused at the final line. A familiar name. Bergen. In the northern tongue, it meant wolf. She recalled the last voicemail Nina ever left, 3 days after she disappeared. I don't know where I am anymore, just snow. They move us at night. I pretended to be asleep last time. Saw a sign. Fort Lucien, then the truck, cold metal floor, smell of gasoline and pine. And I heard them call him the wolf. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The next morning, Isla visited Frank Dietz, now retired, living quietly on the outskirts of Darrow. When he opened the door, his gaze went still at the sight of her. Sergeant Varnen, he said. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. I need to talk. About Mira Halden and Nina. Inside the house, thick with the smell of old tobacco, Frank quietly poured tea and sat down. You believe there's still something out there? Isla didn't hesitate. Not believe. I know. They returned together to Route 42, where Mira's hand had been found. The forensic tape still fluttered in the wind, like a scar on the frozen earth. Frank said nothing the entire drive, not until they stood at the edge of the ravine. There was something I once suspected, he said, about an old logging camp used for the wrong reasons, but no one believed me. They said it was just village folklore. Red Hollow Camp? Frank looked up, eyes suddenly sharp. You've been there? Isla nodded. And I saw the names carved on the wall, my sister's name among them. He fell silent. After a moment he said, Then you'll need to see this. From an old box he pulled out a faded Polaroid. Mira Halden, terrified, clothes torn, a bruise around one eye. Behind her, the red wooden wall, the same one Isla had seen, with the carvings. This was evidence. I didn't dare submit, Frank sighed. They told me to stay out of it. They were my superiors. Isla held the photo, her eyes stinging. Nina was there too. I believe you, he said, but now you'll need to make noise, loud noise. The ashen afternoon sky hung low over the Darrow forest like a heavy blanket. Isla parked in front of a single-story house wedged between two long-abandoned convenience stores. A weathered wooden sign out front read, F. Dietz. In her hand was a reprinted file from Mira's notebook, a list of scattered notes including the name Bergen and several coded fragments. But now a new name had emerged from a recent clue. T. Varnen. Her father. It was unthinkable. Isla had uncovered documents related to a transport route once approved through the provincial police force. The authorizing officer, Sergeant Tobias Varnen, her father, who retired in 1999. Beneath his name, a line read, Logistics Supervisor, Red Hollow Camp, Operational Years 1996-1997. Isla felt the ground vanish beneath her. She returned to the house and rifled through old files, duty rosters, transfer orders. Everything matched. Her father had overseen logistics for the camp at the exact time Mira and Nina disappeared. As night fell, Isla returned to Red Hollow. She didn't inform anyone. No forensic team, no clearance from superiors. She brought only a flashlight, a notebook, and a resolve that had burned for years. Beneath the third cabin, she found another entryway, lower, deeper, nearly a cellar. In the beam of her light, she saw 3 dust-covered mattresses, a rusted tin bowl, and a small notebook lying amidst old fabric. Isla picked it up. Inside were photographs, Polaroids, young girls, fear in their eyes. Some were already dead. The last photo, Nina Varnen, head tilted to one side, cheek bruised but alive. The photo was dated August 1997, 3 weeks after she vanished. Nina hadn't run away. She had been taken, held, tortured, and possibly still alive. Isla left Red Hollow with 2 things in her pocket, the notebook and a fire that would not be extinguished. The next morning, Isla went to the office of former Darrow Creek Sheriff Gerald Hark, once her father's deputy. Her hand gripped the case file, Mira's notebook, and the Polaroid of Nina, like 3 nails piercing the silence of the last 28 years. "Good morning, Sergeant Varnen," Hark said, reclining in his chair, an old porcelain coffee mug in hand. "What brings you in looking so resolute?" Isla didn't answer. She laid the file on the desk. "We're dealing with a network," she said. "It started at Red Hollow, but it didn't end there. The girls, Mira, Nina, and dozens of others, didn't just disappear. They were taken, transported, possibly across the border." Hark leaned back, eyes quietly scrutinizing her. "And what exactly are you basing that on?" Isla opened the notebook. Mira's notes, names, and coded fragments came into view. Then the photo of Nina. She was held at least 3 weeks after she was declared missing. At that camp, her name was carved into the wall, alongside Mira's and others. Hark remained silent for several seconds, then his lip curled slightly. "You're digging up things people buried for a reason." "Why?" Isla asked, her voice steady. "Because no one survives when they go up against this kind of darkness." He tilted his head. "But you're different. You have roots. You had a father who worked there." Isla stood straight. "And maybe he was caught in that web, too." She left the notebook behind and turned to leave. But before stepping out, she added, "I'm not afraid of the dark, Mr. Hark. I grew up in it." That evening, Isla re-examined a detail that had once been overlooked, the 1997 personnel list tied to transport points in the Red Hollow area. Among the faded names, one stood out, M. Vasquez alias Handler. Isla ran the name through the federal system, no official record, but one suspicious hit surfaced from the Olsen border checkpoint. A white truck, no license plates, photographed in 1997, driven by a man using a forged passport under the name Vasquez, matching the file's description. She forwarded the photo to a former colleague at Interpol Canada. The response came in less than 2 hours. This individual was once suspected of trafficking people from northern Canada to the Mexico border. No prosecution, insufficient evidence. Isla understood. This web was larger than anyone had imagined. 3 days later, Isla stood in the provincial police headquarters in Reynard, facing a wall plastered with maps, satellite images, and personnel files. In her hand was a leaked copy of a personal file belonging to someone named Miguel Vasquez, accompanied by a note from Interpol. Connected to transnational trafficking network, suspected activity along the Darrow El Sur route. That wasn't all. An attached document indicated that Vasquez had been present in the Dustbridge area, once home to the Dusty Spur Inn, a known gathering place for truck drivers and smugglers. The establishment was registered under one name, C. Bishop, a local contractor specializing in logistics for the extraction zone. Full name, Caleb Bishop. Isla stood frozen. Caleb Bishop had once overseen transportation at the Red Hollow site. He appeared in the financial records of the provincial police, and her father, Tobias Varnen, had signed off on his shipments. Clues piled upon each other like a line of dominoes on the verge of collapse. When Isla combed back through internal records, an old report surfaced. Information about a female employee named Lorraine Hensley, a relative of one of the old victims who had gone missing just 3 days prior. She had been the last to distribute flyers about the disappearances and had last been seen near Trail 42. Isla knew then Lorraine had discovered something. That afternoon, the search team found Lorraine's body in the woods, not far from where Mira's hand had been uncovered. She lay on her back in the snow, a bullet wound in her chest, the dried blood hardened like rotten velvet. No tire tracks, no drag marks, only snow and utter cold. Isla knelt beside the body. Near Lorraine, a piece of paper was tucked in her jacket pocket, ink smudged but legible. List of names from Amber's notebook, enough to trace back. Give to Isla if I don't return. 6 names were scrawled on the page. G. Hark, T. Varnen, R. Farnell, M. Vasquez, C. Bishop, and a new name, Handler, Spurbar. One of them, Vasquez, had been marked in red ink. Night fell. Isla sat at her desk, the list laid out before her. She dialed her liaison at Interpol. Listen carefully, she said slowly. I have evidence this trafficking network is still active, and I know who's leading it. There was silence on the other end. Then a voice responded. We're tracking a transport route near the Ojinaga border. There's a truck matching your description, headed north. Isla tightened her grip. Naomi might be on that truck. 3 days later, Isla boarded an emergency flight to Texas, joining forces with the International Task Force stationed near the Ojinaga border. They had been tracking the white truck, unmarked, running a south to north route, suspected of transporting people in contraband. Satellite data confirmed the truck had stopped at a warehouse buried deep within a poor residential district near the Mexican border. Naomi could be in there, Agent Navarro said as they prepared to move in. Isla nodded. Even if she isn't, she was held somewhere just like it. The raid began near midnight. The task force split into 3 teams. Isla led the charge through the side entrance. Inside, they found a labyrinth of small rooms, makeshift walls, dim lights, and a stifling odor of mold and damp. She pushed open the final metal door at the end of the corridor. In the dim yellow light of the small room, Naomi Varnen stood, thin but alive. Her hair was short, a scar marked her face. She turned around, eyes wide. Recognition flared. It's you, Naomi whispered. Isla didn't speak. Naomi rushed forward, throwing her arms around her sister, her body trembling like it might shatter. You came too late, she said, her voice rough. No, Isla whispered, just in time. Outside the warehouse, the operation continued. 15 women were rescued. 4 suspects were taken into custody on site. 1 driver escaped through a back alley, but inside the leader's office, Miguel Vasquez, they recovered documents, photographs, phones, and a logbook of transport routes. Everything matched what Mira had once written. In the interrogation room, Vasquez said nothing, but among the seized files were forged IDs, encrypted itineraries, and financial ledgers, all pointing to a central coordination hub farther north, in Darrow Creek. Isla knew the head of the snake hadn't been severed. That night, Isla and Naomi sat together in a secure room operated by the task force. Under soft light and the scent of warm tea, Naomi began to speak. They grabbed me when I left the youth center, she said. Same path Mira took, same white truck. 2 men. One sounded Canadian, one had a Mexican accent. They didn't say much, just hooded me, injected something. When I woke up, I was in the cellar at Red Hollow. Isla held her sister's hand. Naomi looked at her, eyes red. There was a man named Vasquez, but another one too, tall, premature gray hair. He only came in winter. They called him Cal. Caleb Bishop, Isla said quietly. Naomi nodded. He came to the camp twice, brought supplies, and took people. In the small hotel room, Isla opened her laptop and pulled up every corporate record linked to Caleb Bishop. He had once been listed as the owner of a string of logistics companies across the north, but all had either been dissolved or transferred under different names after 1998. A data leak confirmed by Interpol showed Bishop had left Canada at the end of the year 2000. Under a new identity, Andrew C. Langford. 12 years later, he surfaced in banking systems in Belize. Then, nothing. Until now. Hours later, Isla stood inside the El Sur Interpol regional headquarters with Agent Navarro. Spread across the table was a satellite map of the borderlands, GPS traces from trucks tied to the underground transport network. Navarro pointed at a blinking blue marker, Arbela Norte Ranch, right at the edge of the Guatemalan forest, fenced, watchtowers, and its own armed security, but that's the last location Vasquez called before his arrest. Isla nodded, and we now have an international warrant for Bishop. 3 days later, they descended by helicopter onto the forest's edge near Arbela, just before dawn. The air was humid, thick with the scent of soil and rotting wood. Unlike the cold snow of Darrow Creek, the atmosphere here was heavy, ready to ignite. The task force moved in. As the loudspeaker rang out, "Caleb Bishop, you are under arrest for human trafficking, conspiracy to murder, and obstruction of justice." No one resisted. Bishop was caught packing files in an underground office. He didn't fight. He simply raised his hands, his eyes quiet, as if he had been waiting for this. At the temporary Interpol station near the border, Isla sat across from Bishop. Between them lay an old ledger, Red Hollow's own, filled with Bishop's handwritten notes, people, routes, payments. On the final page was a single line, "She was never forgotten." Isla stared straight at him. "You knew who they were, but you chose to sell them." The Bishop remained silent. Then he said quietly, "I didn't kill them. I was just the transporter," Isla answered, unblinking. "Worse." The next day, Isla and Naomi returned to Darrow Creek. They stopped at Trail 42, where winter still held sway. No more police tape, no more patrols, only wind and snow. Naomi knelt, her hand closing around the bracelet Mira had once made. From her coat, she pulled out another, red, white, and yellow, and placed it beside the first. "She promised to make this one for me," Naomi said softly, "but she never got the chance." Isla whispered, "Now you have it." They stood and walked deeper into the forest. That night, Isla and Naomi sat on the porch of their mother's old house. Above them, stars pierced through the snowy veil, shining like cold metal. The fire in the wood stove crackled steadily. Naomi, freshly bathed and wrapped in their mother's wool sweater, was thin but alive. Isla looked at her sister, then turned to the dark forest beyond. "Do you hear them?" Naomi asked. Isla nodded. "Yes, but it's not crying anymore." Naomi smiled, a thin, sorrowful smile. "Good. It's more like singing." Isla didn't reply. She simply listened, as if the forest itself was whispering about those it had once swallowed and was now giving back. The next day, Isla submitted the full case files to the Federal Committee and Interpol. The dossier named those who had stayed silent, assisted, or participated directly. G. Hark, R. Farnell, T. Varnen, her father, and over a dozen others. All were forwarded for international prosecution. No one would be allowed to hide anymore. A month later, the Red Hollow ring case was made public. 42 confirmed victims, 8 suspects arrested, 3 on the run, and 1 deceased. Among the victims were many once dismissed as runaways or unreliable. Now they had names, they had faces, they had voices. Naomi spoke at a memorial in Darrow Creek. They used to call us missing, runaways, shadows, but we weren't lost. We were stolen. And now, we've been heard. In the end, Isla returned to the old site. Trail 42. No more deep snow, just soft grass and green moss. She knelt, hand touching the earth. Beneath this ground had once been pain, but it was also where the search had begun. Isla rose, her eyes fixed on the forest. A breeze stirred the pine branches like a quiet sigh. But this time, there was no fear. Only a very faint song, gentle but unmistakable.